Nestled in the heart of Silicon Valley, Palo Alto is well known for its proximity to Stanford University and its connection to the tech world. Yet, one other feature differentiates Palo Alto from its neighbors: architecture. Often overlooked, the wide variety of architectural choices and building styles within the city are a result of rapid growth and evolution, often in tandem with the university. But how did this intellectual capital get to look like this, and this? When Leland Stanford sought to establish his university in 1885, the still unincorporated city of Palo Alto was covered with farms and fields. To fulfill his vision of a California university that would rival its eastern counterparts, Stanford knew his campus needed to look the part.
So Leland Stanford hired his 3 associates.
This is Steve Steiger. He's a historian at the Palo Alto Historical Association, which collects and maintains materials regarding the city's heritage. Although Palo Alto wasn't established as a separate entity until 1984, early developments within the city were considerably influenced by Stanford's blend of Romanesque and Mission Revival architecture.
You know, the church and the walkways and tile roofs, they were using sandstone instead of adobe. But this image of what someone from the East who's coming to California thought California looked like 50 years earlier.
Towards the early 20th century, the city's new residents brought with them the popular building styles from back east, such as the Queen Anne's for the well-off, while others opted for the more modest craftsman homes.
And that's the whole thing, is that Palo Alto had a chance to build in the newest styles from day one. Once the first buildings were built up, they could adopt what was current and what was popular. And there weren't any architects here. I think they probably could have found one in San Francisco, but I mean, the ones that Stanford hired were from Boston. And they sent someone out here, who lived out here and supervised it, but the designs were all done back east. And if you were a merchant going to build a retail outlet in Palo Alto, you would use what they called pattern books. And these were sort of like catalogs that described all of the house styles that you could buy the plans for. And so you would leaf through this catalog. They would send you, for a modest sum, floor plans or the building plans that then you could hire a local contractor who might be from Mountain View, from Redwood City, or even San Francisco or San Jose, because there was no one in Palo Alto.
Some of the earliest attempts to fill the void of a resident architect were made by Charles Hodges, who designed the Memorial Arch at Stanford and the University Library. With their grandeur, both buildings reflected the era's City Beautiful movement, while marking a departure from Leland Stanford's more modest and utilitarian vision for his campus. Just a few years later, when the 1906 earthquake struck the area, both buildings were left in complete ruin. While San Francisco and Stanford University suffered more damage, the effect on Palo Alto was severe and extensive. Among the Palo Alto residents who witnessed the destruction was Burge Clark. Clark, who designed over 200 buildings within the city, would later become Palo Alto's best-loved architect.
The big name is Burge Clark. His father was the first art professor at Stanford, and being an art teacher, had some dabbling in architecture, and he's credited with several structures as well. But Burge went through the Palo Alto school system. Well, he graduated from Palo, went off to college back east, went off to World War I, where he was a balloonist. He was up in a balloon with a spyglass and having Germans shoot at him. But he survived, and he came back home, and he got some jobs designing. And of course, by this time, this is now the early 20s, it's already a town, it's matured, it's not gonna fail. And they're looking for bigger and better things.
Well, Burge really, he got cranking in the 20s. He did a lot of stuff in the 30s, like the building that the Palo Alto Clinic was in downtown. That was all early California style.
Influenced by Spanish colonial architecture, Clark began designing what he called early California or California colonial buildings throughout Palo Alto. Although there were variations, The exterior architecture of this style typically includes stucco walls, red clay roof tiles, cast concrete ornaments, and wrought iron grills. Also referred to as the city that Burge built, Palo Alto is truly a unique example of a city in which the work of a single architect shaped a major component of its image.
It was just that he was so full of life and so interested in making sure that his buildings worked functionally, they didn't leak. And you know, it sounds kind of silly to say because obviously you don't want your buildings to leak, but not every architect can actually make that happen. And Burge had an absolute fascination with new materials. And he'd always say, don't be the first one to use a brand new material. Let someone else be the first, see how it works, and then use it yourself if it doesn't fail.
Even today, many of Clark's residential and commercial buildings can be spotted in the downtown Ramona district, Professorville, or throughout Stanford University. To learn more about some of the prominent architecture by Burge, Clark, and others of the early 20th century, I visited Amy French, Chief Planning Official at the City of Palo Alto.
You know, with the downtown, we have a lot of older buildings downtown still. One notable small district is this architectural district here on Ramona between University and Hamilton. And within that block, there are a number of important resources, including Pedro de Lemos and Burge Clark. There are a number of, Italianate. There's some Queen Anne Victorians around Palo Alto. We have some National Register landmark properties that include houses as well as non-houses. The Squire House is one that people are familiar with on University, the white one with the columns and the palm trees out front. So that's important to the city. We have a number of other non-historic homes. We had the Palo Alto Medical Clinic, which is it's the Roth building where they're looking to do a museum over there south of here. We have a number of historic districts, such as the Professorville Historic District. And so that's where the professors lived who taught at Stanford. So that's why they call it that. But, even our post office here down the street on Hamilton is that's a Burge Clark, and that's on the National Register. The Women's Club here, and that's a kind of a craftsman, that's on the National Register.
And then World War II came along. And that really changed things. Because a lot of men came out here on their way to the Pacific to fight, and they experienced California, and they all said, whoa, I'm not going back to the heat and the muggy weather. This is an incredible place. So they all started coming out here. So the big revolution came in the 1950s when there was a huge economic push to just get buildings up. I'm not saying the buildings were good, but there was a big push to get them up.
At the end of a 5-day trip from England, the Queen Elizabeth, world's largest ocean liner, pulls into New York Harbor. Aboard are almost 15,000 happy GIs, most of them men of the 8th Air Force.
The influx of new residents, combined with the housing and mortgage privileges given to veterans with the Servicemen Readjustment Act, better known as the GI Bill, led to the nationwide rise of tract houses. More than 40 million housing units were built in the United States during the 30-year period following the end of World War II, and at least 30 million of these were single-family houses. In California, approximately 6 million homes were constructed. However, those like Joseph Eichler believed that the predominant Levittown-style suburban homes failed to integrate the more modernist architecture used in the 50s and 60s commercial buildings. His concept for the Eichler homes maintained the scalability and affordability of previous tract houses while being designed to bring the outside in with skylights and floor-to-ceiling windows.
And they built 3,000 of them in Palo Alto. Eichler just had like a factory out in the field. He'd have people going down and pouring foundations, and then behind them at a certain pace would be people putting up the walls and the people going in doing the plumbing. And so it was almost like, you know, an assembly line for houses. That's why he could build 3,000 of them in just a couple dozen years.
Although Eichler was not an architect himself,
He basically worked with very good architects, San Francisco architects, and the basic design of the Eichler house is very good. And really, you get a lot of light and space, and the idea of the early California style dominating dropped away. Again, I think because it just changed with World War II and people coming back. Coming back from World War II, there was just a huge amount of building, and it had to be fast. And the early California style is a beautiful style. I love it, but it's not fast.
but even with the prominence of early California style and the newer Eichlers, Palo Alto's architectural image was, and still is, far from monotonous.
So, you know, we started with the Queen Anne cottages and some Victorian commercial buildings. Then it went into these revival styles. So we have the classical revival at the 900 University, the Squire House. We have the colonial revival, so looking like something from the East Coast. And then there's the kind of novel Tudor revival styles and medieval revival. We also think of these as kind of storybook, cottagey, you know. Some other ones called Bay Area tradition, which again, this looks more like the shingle style. We think of McKim, Mead and White. And then the streamlined modern. One notable streamlined modern building in town is the train station at University Avenue.
When Palo Alto began to gradually run out of available real estate in the late 60s, planners started to turn their attention upwards. Although families did not prefer high-rises, such buildings could offer more businesses the opportunity to be located in the heart of the emerging Silicon Valley. While earlier projects like the Stanford Research Park had preserved the city's suburban appearance, the newly proposed modern skyscraper on 525 University Avenue was set to completely alter the city's skyline. At 237 feet tall, the building was designed in the late modernist architecture of the 1960s and was slated to become the city's first vertical business park.
And the business, which centered on University Avenue, started to grow too. You know, investment brokers and other businessmen, just companies having headquarters and stuff in there. And they wanted bigger buildings than the normal, what used to be 2- and 3-story buildings along University Avenue and surrounding town.
After the initial opening in 1966, plans were made to construct the second tower on the same site. However, as residentialists gained control of the city council, plans for the additional tower, along with other similar projects, were scrapped.
The politics of the town flipped, and the residents said, no, this is not what we want our town to be. It's okay for San Francisco, it's okay for San Jose and other places, but not for us.
And people care a lot what gets built near them. Nowadays, it's their biggest investment. And so there are people that don't want to have big windows glaring down at their home. And so since 2001, we developed the individual review guidelines in the program, where we have discretionary review of 2-story homes. So that's can constrain an architect as to what they can build, for sure.
Today, Palo Alto remains dominated by single-family dwellings. However, recent years have seen an increasing number of residents moving out, and remodeling historic homes to fit the desires of their new owners has become more common.
People tear down existing houses and build something newer, probably bigger. They remodel the hell out of an existing house and make it into what they want.
Buildings like this 1930s streamlined modern on 450 North California Avenue have become some of the few standing examples of this style. This home, listed in the city's historic inventory as a major building of regional importance, is now up for sale. To preserve Palo Alto's architectural diversity and heritage, the city relies on community organizations like Palo Alto Stanford Heritage and the Ordinances by its Architectural Review Board.
So usually when somebody wants to change the inside of a home, it's just a building permit and it's not subject to consideration for its historic aspects. If something is on our inventory and somebody comes forward, we take a look at what they're doing on the exterior and we give advice on how to do it better. But some projects, if they want to demolish the building, that's when we get into a harder aspect if they're on the inventory itself.
It's been nearly 150 years since the first buildings at Stanford University, marking the inception of Palo Alto's architectural heritage. Still, the city's landscape keeps evolving with each new brick.
I really think the prime role of a good architect is to create space, three-dimensional space, because it does wonderful things for the soul if you're working or living in a good three-dimensional space.